Guy calls you a genius you're not going to disavow. Do we agree? Only a stupid person would disavow, not a genius. No genius would disavow being called a genius. Why would I disavow? And there it is. That moment right there, that's where everything shifts. Guy calls you a genius. Is anybody going to disavow? We don't disavow. That wasn't some random comment thrown out in a conversation. That was a statement, a declaration, a line so confident, so committed that it made you wonder, who actually talks like this? But wait, it gets more interesting. Because his Republican opponents came to him, literally sat across from him and said, "You have to refute that. You have to tell people you're not a genius." And his response? Pure defense. I'm not refuting it when somebody calls me a genius. Why would I? Think about that for a second. Someone tells him to deny it, and instead of just brushing it off, he doubles down, triples down. He frames it as something only a stupid person would do. Only someone low intelligence would refuse a compliment about being a genius. The logic is airtight. If you're truly brilliant, you'd accept the compliment, right? Wrong. That's the trap nobody saw coming. The setup nobody expected. Because here's what makes this story interesting. Donald Trump had spent years, not months, years, selling the exact same idea. That his mind wasn't just sharp, that his intellect wasn't merely impressive. No, his mind was legendary, superhuman. The kind of intelligence that only comes along once in a generation. He said it in interviews. He said it in rallies. He said it on social media. The message was consistent, relentless, and crafted with precision. I am smarter than everyone else. And then came the claim that sounded so absurdly, impossibly big that you wondered if anyone would even dare to challenge it with a straight face. Because this wasn't about being very smart or sharp for his age. This was about a 180 IQ. 180. For context, a 180 IQ places you in the top 0.001% of human intelligence. We're talking about the intellectual level of people who solve unsolved mathematical problems, people who redefine entire fields. A 180 IQ is not bragging. A 180 IQ is stepping outside the realm of normalcy completely. The room expected the usual response, the knowing laughter, the eye rolls from the audience, the kind of moment that would show up on late-night comedy shows for 3 weeks straight. People pointing and saying, "Did he really just claim that?" But Samuel L. Jackson didn't walk in like he was about to deliver a typical punchline. When the joke stopped being funny, he treated it like evidence, real evidence, evidence of something deeper, something that required examination. And what he revealed next made the entire studio lean forward simultaneously. You could feel the energy shift, the tone change. This wasn't going to be a quick joke. This was going to be a dissection. Now here's the brilliant part, and this is where Jackson's strategy became almost surgical. He didn't walk in waving a real medical file. He didn't pretend to have stolen private records. He didn't try to create fake documents or Photoshop test results. That would have sounded cheap, fake, easy to dismiss as a political attack. That would have handed Trump an out. Instead, Jackson held up something far more devastating, what he called Trump's failed cognitive test. But not just any test, a satirical scorecard, built entirely from the public record. Every single piece of evidence was something everyone had already seen. No leaked documents, no confidential information, just what was already out there, arranged in a way that forced you to see the pattern. This was dangerous because it was undeniable. The test that wasn't really a test. Jackson didn't pretend he was a doctor. He never claimed to have medical authority. That would have weakened his position. Instead, he framed it as exactly what it was, a mirror. A mirror held up to the very claims Trump had been making for years. And the scorecard? It wasn't measuring IQ in the traditional sense, it was measuring something far more important for a leader. Memory. Can you remember what you said yesterday without contradicting yourself today? Focus. Can you stay on a single topic without drifting into personal grievances, ratings concerns, or attacking your enemies? Judgment. Can you distinguish between a legitimate national problem and something that simply offended you personally? Humility. Can you admit when you don't know something? Can you learn from mistakes? The ability to answer a question without turning it into a personal insult. Stay with this because this is where the joke, the actual joke, stopped feeling like a joke and started feeling like something else entirely, something heavier, something true. Jackson looked directly at the 180 IQ claim and asked the one question Trump never seems prepared to answer. If the mind is that brilliant, why does the proof always have to come from the man bragging about it? The audience laughed, but it wasn't light laughter. It wasn't dismissive. It carried something heavier, recognition. They had all heard the genius claims before. They had all been subjected to the very stable genius routine. They had all watched the way Trump transforms intelligence into a trophy, and anyone who disagrees into someone too slow to understand his brilliance. They knew the pattern. Category 1. Focus. Jackson opened the first section of the mock test and everyone could feel their bodies tense. Focus. He asked, can Trump stay on a single question without drifting toward ratings? Toward crowd sizes? Toward the insult he heard last week? Toward something completely unrelated? And then the audience remembered. They remembered interview after interview where a straightforward question about policy would somehow end up being about his approval numbers or how big the crowd was at his last rally. They remembered press conferences where he'd start talking about the economy and end up discussing how unfairly he'd been treated. They remembered the tangents, the digressions, the inability to stay contained. The studio cracked up, but not because the test was funny, because the answer was already sitting in public memory. It was obvious. It was there. Category 2. Judgment. Then Jackson moved to the next section and the laughter faded slightly. Judgment. Can he tell the difference between a serious national problem and a personal grievance? Can he leave something alone, truly leave it alone, without making it bigger than it started? Can he take criticism without turning it into a war? The implications hung in the air. This was sharper, because the test was no longer about IQ numbers or abstract intelligence. The test was now about leadership, about whether someone can distinguish between what matters to the country and what matters to their own ego. It's a different category, harder to dispute, harder to deny. Category 3. Humility. And then came humility. That's when the room got genuinely quiet. Jackson said something that landed like a stone. Real intelligence doesn't announce itself every 5 minutes. It listens, it studies, it admits when the answer is complicated. It doesn't need applause after every sentence. The words just hung there. A man with genuine confidence can let evidence speak. A man who keeps shouting genius may be trying to cover the silence where evidence should be. That line, hit hard in ways that transcended politics. For older Americans watching, the moment carried weight beyond any election cycle. They had known loud men. They had worked for loud men. They had been loud men in their younger years. They understand something younger generations are still learning, that certainty is not the same thing as wisdom. They've seen bosses who confused confidence with competence. They've seen salesmen who turned bluster into success. They've seen celebrities and politicians use conviction like a weapon, turning doubt into weakness in the eyes of followers. They know, they truly know, that intelligence is not only a number, it's not an IQ score on a test. Intelligence is patience, restraint, curiosity, the ability to be corrected without falling apart, the humility to say, I was wrong. Jackson gave that life experience a voice, and the audience didn't just hear it, they felt it. The question that changed everything. Then Jackson brought the test down to ground level, street level, the level where actual people live. What does a 180 IQ do for a family paying more for groceries? What does genius mean to a teacher buying classroom supplies with their own money? What does it mean to a veteran waiting for care? What does it mean to a retiree watching prices climb and watching their savings shrink? He paused. If intelligence only serves ego, it's not public strength, it's private decoration. That was the brutal truth compressed into one sentence. Because genius, real genius, should serve people. It should solve problems. It should build things, make things better. When intelligence becomes just another way to say, I'm better than you, it's not genius anymore. It's just narcissism dressed up in a suit. The defensive proof. Here's what made the whole segment more powerful than Jackson probably even intended. Trump's imagined reaction only made the failed test feel more accurate. Think about that. The idea that Trump would be defensive about it, the concept that he would respond, that alone proved the test was working. Because if Jackson was wrong, why would the joke sting? If the 180 IQ claim was actually solid and defensible, why would one satirical scorecard create pressure? If the genius brand was truly untouchable, why did one calm actor with one simple question make it wobble under studio lights? The more defensive Trump sounded, and he sounded defensive, the more every answer looked like another failed category. Another piece of evidence proving the test. The louder he denied it, the more he confirmed it. And that is why the audience roared. Because they weren't laughing at a leaked secret result. They weren't laughing at a medical conspiracy. They were laughing at something they'd witnessed 1,000 times. A familiar pattern finally named. Finally articulated clearly. Finally put into words. Trump says he doesn't care what people think, then proves he cares by spending hours reacting to them. He calls critics low IQ, then spends days responding to their comments. He claims unmatched brilliance, then treats every single challenge like an attack on his identity. He creates the pattern. He completes the pattern. He validates the pattern. The moment of silence. Jackson didn't need to leak anything real. He leaked the obvious. By the end, the failed cognitive test wasn't about medicine. It wasn't about IQ scores or neuroscience. It was about composure. It was about whether a man who calls himself a genius can survive one calm question, one simple, rational question, without reaching for insults, excuses, or self-praise. That silence told the audience more than any number printed on paper ever could. That silence was the answer. And in that moment, Samuel L. Jackson did what no official paperwork could do. He made people think.